I've said this before, and you've probably heard tons of Korean teachers say this. Once you learn Hangul, you won't have trouble reading Korean again, is what they said. So you spend your time learning Hangul, you go into the real world, and you realize there are a lot of words that are not pronounced the way they look according to Hangul. To be honest with you, there is a huge list of standardized rules, about 20 to 30 pages, single space, size 8 font, and I've read all of that for you. I've compiled a list of 7 words that I think demonstrate the most commonly seen pronunciation rules. Note, this video is not for absolute beginners. You should know how to read Hangul and you should know some basic pronunciation rules. If you need some resources, I've put them in the description below. Before we start, pause this video and take a look at these 7 words and write down or speak aloud how you think they are pronounced. And now let's get into the main video. 같이, 같이. A very common word, 같이, means together. You may remember a British K-pop girl group by this name. After you learn Hangul, one of the first pronunciation rules you learned was probably if a syllable ends in a 받침, which is a consonant at the end of the syllable, and then there's the next syllable with a vowel starting, then you move the 받침 from the bottom of the first syllable to the beginning of the second syllable. So if you had something like 먹, you would move the 기억 to the next syllable and write and say 먹어, 먹어, 먹어. Well, 같이 follows that same pattern. You have to move the 받침 from the bottom of the first to the beginning of the second syllable. But this word has a bit of an exception. When the ending sound is a tiat and the starting sound of the next word is e, then the tiat turns into a ch sound. So instead of 같이, we have 같이, 같이. Some more examples of this are, instead of 붙이다, we have 붙이다. Instead of 파티, we have 파치. This kind of change also happens when the 받침 is a tigat and the next sound is an e. The tigat turns into a chiat sound. So instead of 굳이, we have 굳이, 굳이. 한국말, 한국말. This is the word for Korean. Another common way to say this is 한국어. Which one do you prefer? When a 받침 is followed by a nasal sound, which means the sound is made by closing your mouth with the air coming out of your nose, 미음 or 니은, the 받침 changes in 3 consistent ways. When the 받침 ends in a 기역 or a 기역 variation, then the 받침 turns into 이응, 이응. So instead of 먹는, we have 먹는, 먹는. Next, when the 받침 ends in tigat or any of these other ones, the 받침 turns into 니은, 니은. Instead of 있는, we have 있는. Lastly, when the 받침 ends in a pi역 or a variation or combination, it becomes 미음, 미음, 미음. Instead of 잡는, we have 잡는, 잡는. 잘 나가, 잘 나가. If you were a K-pop fan in the 2010s, then you would have for sure heard 2NE1's famous song, I Am the Best, 내가 제일 잘 나가.
내가 제일 잘 나가. 내가 제일 잘 나가.
잘 나가 means popular or on top of your game, and it's pronounced 잘 나가, but spelled 잘 나가. Why? So 잘's 받침 is the 릴, and 릴 is a liquid. And once you hear this liquid, you'll notice that it's pronounced very differently. Your mouth is basically like in a circular shape, like for example, 물, right? 물. You can see your mouth is very kind of circular. So this liquid actually has a lot of problems when it encounters other consonants. When the very round lir meets the very flat nian, the nian turns into a lir. So it's influenced by this very round sound. So it doesn't matter if the nian is first and then lir is second or flipped, both turn into lir. So this is another example of peer pressure. Phonetics peer pressure. So instead of 신랑, it's pronounced 신랑. Instead of 신랑, it's pronounced 신랑. Instead of 실내, it's pronounced 실내. Instead of 실내, it's pronounced 실내. 대통령, 대통령. This is the word in Korean for president. If you have been keeping up with Korean politics lately, you would know that this word is everywhere in the news media, so all the better to know how to pronounce it properly. Just now we talked about how rir is a liquid and how it is very strong. Well, if it follows after a mium or iung, then it turns into nian. For example, instead of 심리, we have 심리, 심리, 심리. Instead of 공룡, we have 공룡, 공룡, 공룡. 축하해, 축하해. This word means congratulations, and it's used very, very commonly. Young people would often shorten it and double it and say 축하 축하 in texting. If you have a hiat before or after any of these consonants, then the hiat and the consonant combine to make an aspirated version of that consonant. So instead of 싫다, we have 싫다, 싫다. Instead of 입학, we have 입학, 입학, 입학. 국밥, 국밥, 국밥. 국밥 is basically rice soup. So the reason I'm putting 국밥 here is because you may have heard in Koreans when they speak fast, you may commonly hear that the second syllable of a word is pronounced with more strength, basically like the sung version of whatever you're hearing. And you're probably right. That's probably what Koreans are saying. And they probably don't even know that they're doing it because it's not something that they can necessarily control. Sometimes, depending on whatever comes before or after, the second sound just comes out stronger. And it's just kind of like a acoustic, the way that the vocal cords work. They just end up coming out strong. So after these 받침s, the following consonant turns into the fortis, strong, or the sung version of themselves. So some examples, instead of 있던, it's pronounced 있던. Instead of 있던, it's pronounced 있던. Instead of 옆집, it's pronounced 옆집, 옆집, 옆집. This also happens when the rir is in front of a lot of consonants, which causes them to be more strong or fortis. Instead of 내가 할 걸, it is 내가 할 걸, 내가 할 걸. Instead of 갈등, we get 갈등, 갈등. Just a quick note on the rules in this section. These are very minute changes that, like I mentioned before, Koreans may not even be aware that they're saying it. So I wouldn't necessarily go out of your way to ask a Korean, is this the way you pronounce your second syllable? They probably would not really know. They probably wouldn't have noticed. And even if you don't pronounce it this way, you pronounce it like the way that it's written, that's fine. People will most likely understand you because if you speak slower, these fortis changes don't necessarily happen. 색연필, 색연필. This word means colored pencil. The first syllable, 색, is color, and 연필 is pencil. But when you say it together, it's 색연필, 색연필, 색연필. So this is the section where I'm going to talk about consonant insertions instead of consonant changes. You may have been confused. You're like, where did the N in 연필 come from? Well, I'm going to show you right now. So these sound insertions only happen when you have a compound word. So a compound word, like I mentioned earlier, colored pencil, 색연필. So how this happens is when two words that, before they come together, the 받침 of the first sound is a consonant, 받침, and then the second word starts with any of these vowels. I, ya, yo, yo, or you. Then the nian is added to the beginning of them, turning into ni, nya, nyo, nyu, and new. So some examples, 부산 is a place. If you have the word 역 at the end, which is the word for station, it turns into 부산역, 부산역. And this happens with a lot of train stations in South Korea, so it's good to know this rule. So back to the example, why did 색연필 turn into 생연필? Well, we've added the nian to the 연. So we have 색연필, but we're not done here because the 기역 in front of the nian cannot stay like that. If you go back to the beginning, you'll see, I think it was rule 2 or 3, you have to turn the 기역 into a ion. Now we have the ion rule and we have 생연필. So this word has a total of 2 sound changes. So if you just memorize these 7 words and how they're pronounced, your pronunciation skills will enhance greatly. Don't worry about memorizing the specific rules. I only included them to help you understand and visualize why these things were happening. As usual, please let me know if you found this video useful. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it to your friends. As usual, see you in the next video.